Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, August 22nd, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Ukraine says it is using U.S. HIMARS inside Russia. So Ukraine's Special Operations Forces said Wednesday that its soldiers are using U.S.-provided HIMARS rocket systems to target pontoon bridges and engineering equipment in Russia's Kursk Oblast. So this statement, which was made on Telegram, marks the first time Kiev has said it's using U.S. rockets inside Russia, which of course marks a significant escalation of the proxy war. The U.S. has said that Ukraine is allowed to use U.S.-provided weapons in its Kursk offensive, but it has not confirmed the use of HIMARS. I tried to get the State Department to confirm it to me the other day. They just pointed me to comments made about kind of unrelated things, so this is Ukraine saying that they are indeed using them, and Russian officials have said that Ukraine has used HIMARS to destroy bridges in Kursk, and this looks like confirmation from the Ukrainian side. So Ukraine's Special Operations Forces said on Telegram, quote, "Where do Russian pontoon bridges disappear in the Kursk region? Our operators accurately destroy them," end quote. So where things stand now, the U.S. still says that it will not support long-range strikes inside Russian territory, but Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing very hard for the U.S. and other NATO countries to lift all restrictions on the use of their weapons. So I am afraid, because this has been the pattern throughout this war, is that the U.S. or NATO will say, well, we're not going to do that. That's too escalatory, and then they end up doing it anyway. I mean, it was only a few months ago that Biden gave Ukraine the green light to use U.S. weapons in attacks on Russian border areas, and then a few months after that, we see this offensive. So I think it's possible. I see a lot of people saying, or a lot of reports saying, that the U.S. is not expressing much support for this offensive. The fact that they're using the HIMARS inside Russia, I mean, that means, as far as I understand it, that they're getting intelligence from the U.S. for these strikes, that they're getting the coordinates to fire these rockets inside Russia. So that is very strong support for a military offensive. So we'll see, and we see the Ukraine hawk, or the Russia hawks inside the U.S. in Congress saying, you got to let the Ukrainians, do whatever they want with our weapons. So it's worrying that this could be the next escalation. According to Zelensky, though, we don't have to worry about the red lines. Putin is just bluffing. It's all just a big bluff. That's what he said the other day when he was arguing for the U.S. and NATO to lift these restrictions. He said that their concerns about escalation are naive. But if you remember, just a few months ago, Russia warned the UK because you had the British came out and said, yes, Ukraine can use our missiles, can use our weapons inside Russian territory. And then Russia summoned the British ambassador and said, if Ukraine uses your weapons on our territory, we could respond by targeting British military sites in Ukraine, because we know that there are a small number of British soldiers in Ukraine advising the Ukrainian forces. They said they could hit British targets in Ukraine and beyond. So pretty serious warning from Russia. Zelensky says, don't worry about it. Give us the missiles. Give us everything. It seems like this is really, it just doesn't seem like this is getting the attention it deserves. I mean, the fact that the U.S. is backing an invasion of Russia, U.S. missiles are being fired into Russia with U.S. intelligence. I mean, something like this would have been unthinkable a few years ago. All right, so the next one here, Moscow says that it repelled one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks. So the mayor of Moscow said Wednesday that the Russian capital city repelled one of the largest Ukrainian drone attacks it faced as Ukrainian forces are stepping up operations inside Russian territory. So Moscow's mayor again said this is one of the largest attempts to attack Moscow with drones. No casualties or damages were reported in the attack. They said that they were all intercepted. The Russian Defense Ministry said that its forces intercepted 11 drones over Moscow, and that they intercepted a total of 45 Ukrainian drones in 5 different Russian oblasts, mostly border regions, and as well as Moscow. And so this goes, we've just seen an increase overall in Ukrainian attacks inside Russia, besides just the ground offensive. Also, there's been a lot of drone attacks. So I do think, if they get the permission to use these longer range missiles, we would probably start seeing some pretty deep strikes in Russia. As far as I know, the ATACMS missiles that the U.S. has given Ukraine, which are the longest range weapon the U.S. has armed them with, have a range of about up to 190 miles, which couldn't reach Moscow from where they are now, at least. But I mean, that's pretty far. They would be able to strike pretty deep inside Russia with some sophisticated weapons, not just these cheap, kamikaze drones that they send into Russia. All right, so the next one here, the war against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. This article is from the American Conservative, so I went over some of this yesterday, but it's just good on-the-ground reporting about this war against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is not to be confused with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is the one that they're going after. And it's interesting. This gets into some of the background that this was kind of launched by President Poroshenko in 2018. This crackdown on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I'm confusing myself now with the two different ones. But the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, it's the one that has historic ties to Russia. But after the Russian invasion, it broke ties with the Moscow Patriarchate and denounced the invasion. Also, as this article and other reporting explains, that the Ukrainian Orthodox Church basically did act independently of Moscow since it came about again at the end of the Cold War. But this really gets into, so this reporter went around to different villages in Ukraine and attended, the liturgy at the Orthodox churches and spoke with people who had their churches seized from them. And this started really in 2019. It ramped up, and people would go in and take over these churches with documents that, according to the priests, of the churches, were forged documents saying that the church was going to be turned over to the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which got recognition from the Patriarchate in Constantinople or Istanbul in 2019. So this stuff, it's a little complicated, but I think it's important because just the accounts from the people in these different villages, they say, in some of them, and there's video, they show this reporter video of this, people coming in with metal pipes and beating parishioners and dragging people out and breaking things, breaking icons. And then in some of these churches that they took over, nobody's going to mass there or divine liturgy. The churches aren't being used. And then they have some of these people that were kicked out of these churches do the liturgy in their houses or outside the churches. A lot of people just show up and pray outside the church. So it is a real crackdown on this Orthodox church in Ukraine. And then, people get angry at me sometimes for covering this because they're like, oh, there's another Orthodox church, saying people could just join that. But I mean, imagine if you're in a church and people in masks come in and beat your priest and take over the church, and then they hand over the church to a different church. Are you going to just start going there? Like, I mean, this is clearly this Orthodox church is being targeted. And what's interesting is that Poroshenko started this in 2018. When Zelensky came in, he kind of put an end to it. But then after the invasion, they really ramped it all up again and really started persecuting the church. And dozens of priests have been arrested. And it's just something that isn't really like reported on properly because people don't understand that there's two different churches. And then as far as I understand it, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the one that they are giving these churches to, they were considered, their predecessor to them had a different similar name, but they were considered schismatic by the Orthodox, patriarchates. And it was actually the U.S. was actually involved in trying to get them the recognition. It just goes to show how involved the U.S. is involved in all this stuff in Ukraine. But anyway, go check this out. It's definitely worth a read. All right, so the next one here, Gaza hostage talks at impasse due to U.S. proposal. So the Times of Israel reported on Wednesday that hostage deal talks between Israel and Hamas are at an impasse because the new U.S. proposal submitted last week goes too far to accommodate Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's demands. So this has been, just what I've figured out by reading the news reports on everything. But this is more confirmation that this U.S. proposal was really an Israeli proposal. And this report cited 2 Arab officials from a mediating country, so that's either Qatar or Egypt, and 1 other official involved in the talks. One of the Arab officials said that the talks are at such an impasse that they don't see a point in convening another high-level meeting of negotiations in Cairo this week unless the U.S. actually puts pressure on Israel to back down on its demands, or puts pressure on Netanyahu to back down on his demands, and then the U.S. would have to amend the proposal. So these demands that the U.S. proposal looks to accommodate are related to the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphi corridor, which is the border, the Gaza-Egypt border. Netanyahu insists that Israel must maintain control, and this is kind of completely rejected by Hamas. And so, according to Hamas, the proposal also does not include a permanent ceasefire or Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken was just in Israel and met with Netanyahu, and after the meeting, he said that Netanyahu accepted the U.S. proposal and that it's now up to Hamas to agree to the deal. So one of these officials who spoke with the Times of Israel said that he was bewildered by Blinken's comments, saying that he's making it seem like Hamas is the only problem here, the only reason why there's not a deal. And then Israeli media reported that members of the Israeli negotiating team, say Netanyahu is trying to sabotage the deal by including these demands. So just more evidence of that this is, Netanyahu trying to prevent a deal yet. If you read American media, this is from the Times of Israel. It's their English language website, but it's like a different world over in some of the U.S. media reports on this that just take the U.S. word at face value, that it's all Hamas's fault. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu at odds with military over the Philadelphi corridor. So this is more about that demand of Netanyahu that Israel must keep troops on the Philadelphi corridor on the Gaza-Egypt border, which includes the Rafah border crossing. So that's what Netanyahu says, but the Israeli military does not agree. So Netanyahu said Israel must maintain control of the border to prevent weapons smuggling from Egypt through tunnels. During previous rounds of negotiations, Cairo agreed to build an underground barrier on the border, but then Netanyahu started demanding indefinite control of the Philadelphia corridor. So according to the Wall Street Journal, Israeli military leaders think Israel doesn't need to keep troops on the border and could prevent weapons smuggling by using sensors and launching targeted raids. But Netanyahu is still insisting on maintaining control of the border, and he reiterated that position again on Wednesday. He said, quote, Israel will insist on the achievement of all of its objectives for the war, as they have been defined by the Security Cabinet, including that Gaza never again constitutes a security threat to Israel. This requires securing the southern border, end quote. So he just continues to make the demand, even though his military, and I've seen other indications, and you're seeing the military, really what their view is they want a ceasefire. They want to give the troops a rest, potentially to prepare for war in Lebanon. But they're telling Netanyahu that, we could restart, the U.S. has already agreed that it doesn't need to be a permanent ceasefire. And it even seems like Hamas agreed to that, not so much that, but they agreed to the previous deal, which had vague language that Israel thought would not commit it to a permanent ceasefire. But Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire at all, it seems like. All right, so the next one here. Israeli intelligence chief takes responsibility for October 7th failures. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. In his final speech as the chief of Israel's military intelligence directorate, Major General Aharon Haliva said he accepted responsibility for his role in the failure to warn about the October 7th Hamas attack. Haliva, who gave his resignation letter in April, handed command of the Intel Directorate to Major General Shlomi Binder. Haliva said, quote, "On that Saturday, we did not fulfill the most important mission, which we are tasked with, providing a warning for war. The responsibility for the failures of the Military Intelligence Directorate is on me," end quote. So Israeli leaders ignored ample intelligence and warnings from within its military during the run-up to the October 7th attack. And so this is something, you look at what Israel did in Tehran recently. They were able to assassinate Hamas's political leader while he was staying in a guest house that was heavily guarded by the IRGC. The Western media reports said that they planted a bomb in the bedroom. People who were there dispute that and say something was fired from the air. Either way, that's some pretty serious intelligence capabilities to pull that off. So they must have known something was coming from Gaza, and there's been this confirmation that they did, that there were warnings upon warnings that they ignored. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrike kills Fatah official in Lebanon. This article is from Jason Ditz. Israel has carried out an airstrike against southern Lebanon city of Sidon Wednesday, targeting a car and killing Khalil Makda, a senior official in the Palestinian Fatah movement. Israel claimed that Makda had been working for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in directing attacks and transferring weapons and funds to militants in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. This was the first direct attack on a Fatah member since the fighting began in October. So this is Tawfiq Tirawi, another senior Fatah member, was deeply critical of the Israeli attack, saying the decision to assassinate a Fatah official was, quote, further proof that Israel wants to ignite a full-scale war in the region, end quote. And there was more strikes, other Israeli attacks in Lebanon on Wednesday as well, and Hezbollah fired another rocket barrage into northern Israel. So things continue to be very tense on the Israel-Lebanon border. All right, so the next one here, U.S. strikes target Yemen's Red Sea province of Hodeidah. So Yemen's Saba news agency reported 3 U.S. British airstrikes in the same district in Yemen's Red Sea province of Hodeidah on Wednesday. Details of the attack are unclear. U.S. Central Command did put out a press release on Wednesday that said its forces launched strikes on Houthi-controlled Yemen, and that includes Hodeidah. CENTCOM claims that it destroyed a Houthi surface-to-air missile and radar system. So we had this Sabah report said that it was a joint U.S.-British attack. That's just kind of how Yemeni and Houthi media have been reporting the strikes on Yemen as U.S.-British aggression, because the UK has joined the U.S. in several rounds of airstrikes in Yemen, including the first one. And that's actually how Yemeni media reported Saudi airstrikes in Yemen as well, as U.S. Saudi aggression, because the U.S. Was supporting that war, giving them the Air Force, the Saudi Air Force, maintaining the planes, refueling them. It goes to show these wars that the U.S. are involved in. A lot of Americans might not be aware of them, and I'm talking about the war in Yemen from 2015 to 2022. But the people who are on the other side of the bombs are very aware of the U.S. involvement. You see that a lot. Palestinians in Gaza, when they get interviewed, a lot of them mention the U.S. So again, the details, we don't get much from these strikes in Yemen, but I think it's important to cover them because it's gotten very little attention that this U.S. bombing campaign continues. And it hasn't deterred the Houthis, and there's been more attacks on commercial shipping, which they started last year in response to Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. So a Greek-flagged oil tanker came under attack in the Red Sea on Wednesday and was left not under command and drifting in the waters, according to the British military. So far, as of Wednesday night, the Houthis have not officially taken credit for it. A lot of times they'll do an attack and then the next day they come out and announce it. And then just some of the background here that I always mention when we talk about Yemen is in this article. Also, according to the Yemen Data Project, just getting into the number of U.S. strikes in Yemen, in the month of July, they put out a monthly update. In the month of July, 23 U.S.-led strikes were recorded. And that was kind of a lower rate than previous months. So, that's a lot. The U.S. has really been bombing Yemen, and all the naval officers say, this is the largest naval battle that the U.S. has been involved in since World War II. And they're talking about shooting down the Houthi missiles and drones over the Red Sea. It's mostly Navy destroyers doing that. I think a lot of destroyers are launching these strikes. A lot of times they get reported as airstrikes, but I think a lot of them are launched from U.S. Navy ships. All right, so the next one here, the largest forcible transfer in West Bank due to settler violence. So this article is from the Palestine Chronicle. So the Norwegian Refugee Council announced Wednesday that the recent illegal settler violence in the occupied West Bank provoked the largest forcible transfer since the weeks following October 7th. So this is, again, the Norwegian Refugee Council. They're saying that in 3 communities in the West Bank, comprising of 119 Palestinians have been forced out in the last 10 days due to attacks carried out by Jewish settlers on community members in their homes, during which they established new settler outposts and they blocked access to water. So they're actively taking over people's homes and communities. And this is, again, has been ongoing. I mean, this has been ongoing for a very long time, but since October 7th, things really ramped up. And this was last week we saw they torched some cars and houses and killed at least one Palestinian. So the settler attacks just keep getting worse and worse. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills dozens of displaced Gaza Palestinians. So this article is from Al Jazeera just about the bombardment in Gaza on Wednesday. The slaughter continues. Horrific footage and pictures coming out of Gaza just constantly. Israel has killed at least 50 more Palestinians and wounded more than 120 in Gaza as its military has ordered new evacuations in central and southern parts of the enclave. Gaza Civil Defense Agency on Wednesday said at least 4 people were killed and 18 wounded in the latest Israeli airstrike on Salah al-Din School, which is sheltering displaced Palestinians in Gaza City. Agency spokesperson Mahmoud Basel told the AFP news agency that 10 of the injured were children. A father told AFP his child was killed in the strike while playing in the schoolyard. So more children being killed. This father said, quote, "We ran to see and saw my son dead. What did this child do to deserve this? He had no missile, no plane, no tank," end quote. The Israeli military said in a statement that the Air Force conducted strikes. Of course, they're claiming that they targeted Hamas. So just the slaughter continues as these ceasefire negotiations seem to be going nowhere, unfortunately. But hopefully there's some kind of breakthrough and there's some relief for these people here. All right, so the next one here, satellite images reveal Israel building new land corridor inside Gaza. This article is from The Cradle, and this is from based on analysis from Forensic Architecture. Basically, what they're saying is that we have the Netzarim corridor, which goes through the middle, sort of the middle of Gaza. Actually, it's not the middle. It's the northern portion of the strip, but it separates northern Gaza, where Gaza City is, from the rest of the strip. And in that Netzarim corridor, Israel has pretty much bulldozed and destroyed all the buildings. Some buildings are still there, like the Turkish hospital that they use as a military base now. But for the most part, they destroyed buildings and destroyed all the agricultural land and are creating military bases there. And there's also Israel's also created what they call the buffer zone around the border, where they demolished everything. So there's this new corridor a little south of the northern Israeli Gaza border, just a little south of that goes to Gaza City from the east to the west. So it's another sign that Israel is has long-term plans of military occupation, that they're completely destroying these areas and establishing military outposts and everything. So again, just more evidence that the long-term plan is to stay. I think that's pretty clear from what they're doing. And one argument of the Israeli military to Netanyahu is like, look, if we pull out, for the first phase of the ceasefire, which is, I believe, 6 weeks or 30 days or something, we'll be able to go back in, So I'm sure that is part of their argument. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. vows to defend the Philippines in the South China Sea. The U.S. has reaffirmed its pledge that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea after the Philippine and Chinese Coast Guards collided in the disputed waters. So the Chinese and Philippine vessels collided on Monday near Sabina Shoal, as we covered on this show. And this is part of the Spratly Islands and claimed by China, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Taiwan. As far as I understand it, this shoal is not actually controlled by anybody at this point. It's about 30 miles west or 30 miles east. It's closer to the Philippines than the second Thomas Shoal. That's the one where they usually have these collisions, where the Philippines grounded a ship on the shoal in the 90s to make their claim. And they have troops there, and so there's always the encounters over them trying to resupply that ship. And this, I think, is could be a useful outpost, say if the Philippines take control of Sabina Shoal, or if China does. So it seems like they might be in competition over this now. And of course, the U.S. is involved in this and is telling the Philippines, is telling China, is telling the world that if these Philippine vessels come under attack, come under, shooting or something, the U.S. would intervene. According to the White House, and this is Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, who spoke with his Philippine counterpart. The White House said in a readout of this phone call, which took place on Tuesday, quote, Mr. Sullivan also condemned the People's Republic of China's deliberate collision with 2 Philippine Coast Guard vessels operating lawfully near Sabina Shoal in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone on August 19th. Mr. Sullivan reiterated the ironclad U.S. commitment to the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, which extends to armed attacks on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft to include those of its Coast Guard anywhere in the South China Sea, end quote. So they're obviously siding with the Philippines here. Both sides are blaming the collision on the other. The U.S. is calling it a intentional Chinese collision, and then reiterating that the U.S.-Philippine Mutual Defense Treaty applies to attacks on Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. So the U.S. is very involved in this conflict, and they have also. He also discussed the new military aid for the Philippines, the $500 million that Blinken announced when he was recently there, and the new U.S. bases, all this new U.S. support for the Philippines and U.S. deepening involvement in the region. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints, one from Medea Benjamin and Nicholas Davies, the DNC Fiddles While the World Burns. One from George Beebe, The Hazards of Ukraine's Incursion into Russia. One from Brian Sadi at The Gray Zone. This is about the accused financer of the Moise, That's the Jovenel Moise, the Haitian president who was killed. And the financer of the assassination was apparently advised by U.S. intelligence. There's some interesting information in this article from Brian Sadi at The Gray Zone, so go check that out. The one from Ramsey Baroud, partners in genocide. Israel is slaughtering Palestinians with Western arms. And one from Caitlin Johnstone, Democrats release insanely hawkish Middle East platform. So she mentioned something in her article, because I went over the new Democratic Party platform the other day. She mentioned something that I failed to in my article about it. They go after Trump for essentially not going to war with Iran. They say they're saying that Trump failed to respond in 2020 when 2020. So it was after Trump assassinated Soleimani, the Iranian general, head of the Quds Force. Iran responded by firing missiles at a U.S. base in Iraq. They basically gave the Iraqis the heads up, so the U.S. probably knew where they were firing towards, an empty side of the base or whatever. And the U.S. troops there did suffer from traumatic brain injuries, but they left it at that. The U.S. didn't respond to that. And this goes after Trump for not responding to that, for essentially that said that he took no action, saying that he's weak on Iran. So it's just really something. It's incredible how hawkish this document is. So that is it for me for today. If you want to support antiwar.com, tell your friends about us, share this show, like and subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, or Odyssey, wherever you prefer to watch. Follow us on Instagram or X. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.